So in my last video, I mentioned that I wanted to do a video where I talk about why the Black Lives Matter movement has failed. And that is what I'm going to do right now. Now, some of you might not realize the Black Lives Matter movement has failed. I knew that the Black Lives Matter movement was failing probably about 2 years ago, if not 1 year ago. Really, probably 2 years ago. And I seen it coming for a number of reasons. But the reason why I say it's failed now is if you notice, as I said in the previous video, Black people have become desensitized to police murders. The reason why I've become desensitized to it is because the Black Lives Matter format was something happens, there's a video of police doing something. Okay, let's talk about it on social media. Okay, let's protest. Okay, let's wait for it to go to court. Okay, it goes to court. Let's go and protest at the court. Oh, verdict says the cop is not guilty. Well, what do? We keep protesting for a few more weeks, and then what do we do next? Well, eventually, protesting can't really be that hot for that long, so we start dwindling off. Eventually, something else happens, and then what do? We go to the next thing. We're focused. Okay, here's a new police murder. Okay, let's talk about it on social media. Same thing all over again. That was the Black Lives Matter format. And they basically, I'm going to assume they really thought that was doing something, but frankly, if you noticed everything that I said, it was all a reaction. Someone do something, we do this, we try to do this, oh, we talk about this stuff, we're going to do this differently. The Black community, we're going to do something, and then what happens? Something else happens, and then we're off to the next thing. That was the way that Black Lives Matter went about their method of doing things. Now, I do understand Black Lives Matter, there's an organization, and then there's the movement. I'm talking, I guess, about the general movement of Black Lives Matter. We'll talk about the organization a little bit too. So, I've seen this happening before, and I remember talking to my father about it, and I told him that I don't think that anything was going to come of it. And in his mind, he's like, well, you don't know, you have to see what happens. And what I seen was that there was a lot of protesting, there was a lot of anger, there's a lot of rage, there's a lot of reacting, but there wasn't a lot of strategic planning. There wasn't a lot of long-term planning. What if this cop is found guilty? Okay, well, we talked to the Department of Justice. What if the Department of Justice says, well, there's nothing we can do? What do we do for that? The other reason I thought and believed ahead of time that the Black Lives Matter movement was going to fail was because I believe personally that police brutality is not an issue in itself. It surprises me how much Black people talk about police brutality like it's not linked to other things going on outside of police brutality. But to me, it is not an issue in itself. It's really, if you look at it, it's a symptom. And what I mean by that is if you look inside of any country where there is a presence of Black people and they are oppressed, what you're going to see is that country, and we're talking about where Black people have some type of minority status, minority even if they're not the minority, those people are heavily policed. Everywhere you go, when Black people have a high proportion of the population that is oppressed, there's going to be a police presence. Why is that the case? Because the police presence is essentially to keep the poor, unruly people in check. So what that means is there's something else going on that causes police brutality. And what it is it really is capitalism and white supremacy. So whenever you have a system that has decided and set up that certain people are going to be on the bottom, certain people are going to be on top, there is something that has to be in place to maintain that system. And the more unjust the system is, the more brutal the system is, the more strong the stronghold is going to have to be as far as police who are going to regulate those people who are poor. So when you consider that, police brutality then is really a symptom of poverty. It's a symptom of the extreme poverty and income inequality that exists inside of the United States. So if that's the case, if that's what it is, then not reacting, okay, we're mad, blah, 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 we're going to protest, but thinking more so about strategy. the strategy, if you're actually trying to get rid of police brutality, would be to end the system of poverty that surrounds police brutality, and not to just go out and protest and react every single time something happens. Because frankly, you'll be doing that and reacting and protesting for the rest of your life, is for the rest of the generations that come. That's what they're going to learn to do. So, like I said, I always believed that the Black Lives Matter movement was temporary. One time I would say optimistic, particularly when I was waiting to see what happened with it. I mean, I remember early on we had this hashtag and you're trying to see what form it takes. And the form that it took, honestly, was not something that was intelligent, in the fact that, to me, as Black people, the intelligent thing to do would be to look at history and base what we do based off of what did work or didn't work in history. If you know history, these reactionary reactions that happen with us whenever we are treated wrong, it may make you feel some temporary justice, but it really does not do anything to correct the issue. And I would think that we're more concerned with correcting the issue and not more concerned with temporary justice. So anyways, I came up with 5 things. This list might be longer, but this is what I really think is the reason why the Black Lives Matter movement, well, no, not the reason why it failed, actually. This is things that I think we should learn from the Black Lives Matter movement. I believe that every single Black person who is about the liberation of our people, we should be students of history. This is recent history, and what I would love to see maybe in the future is a group of Black leaders, Black people, sit at a table and talk about what happened in the civil rights movement that did not correct the issues of our problems. But seeing that this is more recent history, I'm going to do this on my own. And this is just my opinion. I'm sure there's probably things I've missed. There's probably things that could be more specific. And honestly, if you have some feedback, if you have comments, if you also believe that the Black Lives Matter movement has failed, and you have things that you think I missed, I would love to read them. I think that we can make this list together, honestly. But here's what I found. So, the number one thing that we should learn about why the Black Lives Matter movement has failed, that social media activism is extremely limited. That is something that is so important right now. And I say that is so important because we have so many Black people on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram, and honestly, the internet has been such a great tool of getting knowledge out, of getting stories out, of having some of us unite under certain concepts. And I think we get so caught up in the positive things of the internet that we honestly think that the internet is an end-all or be-all to our issues. However, if you understand how nation building works, at the end of the day, after you're done storing that knowledge, you have to go out there and do something. You have to go out there and put your feet to the pavement. You have to go out there and work. You have to go out there and build. However, staying on social media, and I remember when Trayvon Martin happened, you know, we all posted pictures, me, myself included, of ourselves with maybe you blocked out your picture or you put yourself in a hoodie, and that was like that was you saying something. And listen, that's a powerful symbol, and I'll get the symbols later. That's a powerful symbol. But at the end of the day, if you're not taking some more corrective action that's actually going to do something about that problem, then all you're doing is you're basically complaining on social media. I want to particularly point out with Twitter, I encourage people, Twitter is an interesting thing. We have Black Twitter, is what people call it. A lot of the people sometimes are more liberal for some reason. But I've heard people call some aspects of Black Twitter shea butter Twitter, which is basically the Black feminist Twitter, whatever. Twitter, I encourage everyone, do not get caught up in every single thing that someone says on Twitter. Sometimes what you'll have is a group of people on Twitter get mad at something or criticize someone for something. So, for example, there's recently the story with Genuine. Genuine turned down the advances of a transgender person. And a lot of people said, oh, not even a lot. Some people said, oh, you're transphobic for the way that you reacted, blah, 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 blah. And based off of a small group of people who had a problem with how Genuine reacted, you had a whole bunch of people jump to his offense, and more to the point where you had so many more people jumping to his defense than actual people that were mad. Why is that important? Because it's important to realize that the way that Twitter operates is anything, if it has enough people talking about it at a certain time, especially when not a lot of things are being talked about a certain day, anything can trend. And it really is deceptive because it makes you think that most people are trying to get you to think one way. Most people are trying to react to one thing. And what you'll be doing is arguing back and forth with people, not realizing that the people who you're arguing with are such a small segment of the Black population that you probably really shouldn't care if they think that those ways. Especially, I want to say this for Black men and Black women. On Twitter, more so than anywhere, I see so many negative conversations between us. And I think we have to understand that a big agenda is for Black men and Black women to not be united, to not be on one front, to not support each other, to think that the other person is plotting against you, to demonize the other person. And when you understand that sometimes you'll have a few Black men say some negative stuff about Black women, and you automatically click and you see it trending, and in your mind you're saying, oh, Black men think this, oh, let me write some piece, Black men ain't this, Black men ain't that. You start arguing and you're convincing yourself that that's most Black men think that. And a lot of times it's not the case. That's vice versa. A lot of times you'll have a few Black women get on Twitter and start saying something about, oh, blah, blah, Black men, or, oh, I do what I want, I do this, blah, blah, blah. And you start seeing this trend and you start reacting to it. However, you're reacting to such a small proportion of the population that you're actually just reinforcing division. So I say that to say, if you're trying to talk to Black women and Black men, talk to them on a one-on-one basis. Don't talk to these mirages that we see on the internet that are supposed to portray the population of Black people in the world, because there's so many of us that you'll never see what we're actually thinking or what we actually feel. And you'll confuse what Twitter trend says as being the real feelings of Black men or Black women. So that was a big segue. But let me get to number 2. Okay, the number 2 thing that we should learn from the failures of the Black Lives Matter movement. Black movements should never link up with non-Black movements. And I put inside of parentheses, me too. So, there's a difficulty with being about Black liberation. That is that Black liberation has been on an agenda for so long that there's been other liberation struggles that have basically tried to compare itself to the Black liberation struggle and tried to say that, hey, you should fight for us too. Now, if you are one of those Black people who also cares about one of those issues, for example, if you're a Black person who is LGBTQI and you want to advocate for both, certainly advocate for both if that's what you want to do. If you're a Black woman who's a feminist, and some people think that being a feminist is automatically against the progression of Black liberation, and I say it's not. If you understand that it's race first, it's not an issue. What I mean by that is whenever you are put in a conflict, when you have to either choose your people or choose this movement, you have to choose your people. And there are some Black feminists, more so I would say Black womanists, who, to me, they're very respected in how they go about things. One, for example, Angela Davis, she identifies herself, I believe, as a womanist. And, you know, I think overall she carries both well, you know, because Angela Davis is about her people. Now, I was saying that to say, so you have different movements that have tried to stand up with the Black movement and try to equate their struggles with our struggles. But the reason why race first is so important, the reason why Marcus Garvey and other people inside of Black history have tried to get us to see that before you start advocating for one of these other groups, you need to advocate for your people, is because Black people, our struggle is very particular because we struggle with white supremacy and we struggle with economics. Economics is what makes us so different. So regardless of if white women have been dealing with sexism, if they have not also been dealing with economic castration that Black people have dealt with, then there's no real comparison for that movement. And I'm going to take a second to drink some water. 1 second. Okay. So there's no comparison. And that's the thing you have to understand. White supremacy is basically exploiting Black people for their resources. That is our taking our resources from us, whether our resource be our labor, whether it be our land, our in Africa, our gold, our minerals, our coffee beans, all those things, abstracting them for their resources in order to maintain your superiority over them. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with an economic system. We're not just dealing with discrimination. We're not just dealing with power plays. We're dealing with a whole economic system. And a lot of these other groups that you try to let stand by you are the same ones that are perpetuating that system. At the end of the day, you have to ask the question, what do white feminists want? Most of the white feminists, they want to be treated the same as white men. So if white feminists get if they achieve their goal, then essentially white feminists will start exercising power the same as white men. And where will you be, black women? Ask that question. So getting back on track, Black Lives Matter, from the get-go, not from the get-go, more so when it became an organization, I would say, started aligning itself with different groups. What you had was a few very liberal black people basically write up the agenda of the organization, and the agendas were essentially these, what's the word? It's, dang it, I'm going to use something if I can't think of it. Okay, I can't think of it, but I'm going to explain it for those who can't think of it. It's the idea that the black struggle and the feminist struggle and the gay struggle and the Latino struggle were all linked. And if you want to get rid of oppression for all of us, you essentially have to get rid of it for each and every struggle. Some of you have thought about the word. For some reason, it's blanking on me, but yeah. So that is a lot of the agenda that the Black Lives Matter movement people have taught. They have aligned themselves with the idea that black women, or not so much black women, women period, have to be treated a certain way. Gays have to be treated a certain way, and all of these things that have nothing to do with black people. And as I said in a previous video, what was the result of that? Well, what ended up happening was essentially other groups are moving past. You have past us as far as success. When you look at the gay movement, you look at how many things they got out of the Obama administration and how much little things black people have gotten out of the Obama administration. It makes you understand that us having different struggles does not at all in the least bit mean that we have the same struggle. In our struggle, we have to focus particularly on us. So another thing with the Black Lives Matter movement that should have been automatically suspect is that it was funded in a lot of ways by white liberals. So anytime you have black people getting money, or not even just white liberals, white billionaires, millionaires, anytime you have people getting money from these people, understand that these people are getting that money because that person who believes in that movement is not going to be a challenge to his authority. It's not going to be a challenge to his agenda. So when you do that, you're automatically put in a box of how much you can talk about, how much you can do. I've never heard Black Lives Matter as an organization talk about capitalism as being something that needs to be thrown out, redone, whatever. So all of that kind of has to do with how these alliances that we make can ultimately be detrimental to our purpose. The third thing that we can learn from the failure of the Black Lives Matter movement is that reactionary politics is not plain politics. And I said in parentheses, symbolism will only reap symbolic rewards. So what I mean by that is, and I covered this in the last video, so I'm not going to get too much into it. Not the last video, to the previous video, when I talked about being reactionary or talking about symbolism. So I'm not going to get too deep into it, but I will just say again that being reactionary is never a politically sound thing. It will give you a temporary satisfaction. You temporarily felt like you did something against the system of white supremacy. You temporarily felt like you did something that's going to help your people. But that temporary feeling wears off very soon. You're going to realize that at the end of the day, all you were doing was being a puppet on a string that was just reacting the way that your conductor had you react. So it's very important to not be so reactionary, but to actually sit back sometimes. Sometimes I've heard incredibly ignorant things coming from people, and I don't necessarily react to it automatically. Perfect example is the Trump administration. If you notice on this channel, I don't talk as much about Trump as probably other people do. The reason is because number one, Trump's a racist. Number two, I know that Trump's a racist. Number three, I have no belief that Trump's going to not be a racist. So if I understand he's a racist and I don't think that he's going to stop being a racist, then why would I react to him whenever he says racist things? Yes, it will give me some temporary satisfaction to do that, but a lot of times I just let it play out because realistically it's not going to do anything. So, like I said, playing reactionary politics. I'm going to say something else about Black Lives Matter. It was very reactionary. We've seen someone get killed. We're going to react to that. We hear something about Black people. We're going to react to that. But very little of it was actual planning or being constructive or actually thinking about the root of these things and the fact that if you only reacting to things, you're going to be reacting forever. So that's number three. Okay. I actually wanted to add one thing to that. And that is in regards to Black Lives Matters and symbolic things. This is something I've noticed personally. A lot of, particularly our generation, we look back at the civil rights movement and we think, oh, I want to be one of those people. And so we might do things that look like or dress ourselves up as if we are those people. So, for example, DeRay McKesson, if anyone remembers, there's one point where he was arrested for being some type of protest. I forget which instance this was, honestly, but he was arrested, and people were so, free DeRay, free DeRay, free DeRay. He gets out, he takes a photo, he comes out of jail, and everyone's like looking at him and putting this photo, like, oh, this is like a civil rights memorabilia and everything. And what you kind of realize is that some people want so bad to be Martin Luther King. And it's funny because, you know, we talked about previously, Martin Luther King is only memorialized as this figure for the most part because of what white people have chosen him to represent. But ultimately, we have to understand that all of this symbolic trying to be like the civil rights movement is something happened in the civil rights movement that fell short. I'm sorry that you don't know this, but the civil rights movement did not achieve the agenda, or they didn't achieve their agenda, which is what Black people would assimilate into the system, because we're still not assimilated into the system. But not only that, their agenda was wrong. Any type of assimilation that does happen is not on equal terms. So another thing that I noticed with the Black Lives Matter movement, they would do these symbolic things such as, we're not going to sit and we're going to die in. We're going to put our hands up and blah, blah, blah. And my question to that was always, what is dying and doing? How is that a power move? We're going to pretend to be laid out on the floor dead. And I always question is, what did you read in history that I missed that made you think that this was something that was going to change the way that things happen? So that's just a side note. We have to get over this glorification of, you know, being one of these people in the civil rights movement and trying to have our picture inside of one of these historical books. At the end of the day, a lot of those pictures or people or movements that were chosen, there's a lot of things that were not reported in the history books, and there's reasons why they were not reported. So keep that in mind, that symbolic also has to do with the symbolic ways that we try to reenact what has happened in the past. All right, I'm going to go to number 4. So the fourth thing that Black Lives Matter movement's failure has taught us is that a black movement needs an economic plan. It's interesting. I've been reading up some on Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, and I have to admit, I kind of read him off a long time ago as just, oh, he's just one of those assimilationists. I used to be in NAACP when I was in college. I remember learning about him being one of the people that started the NAACP. And what I realized is that W.E.B. Du Bois was actually a very complex figure. He started off as an assimilationist, and if you know anything about Marcus Garvey and him, he was actually vehemently opposed to people like Marcus Garvey and Booker T. Washington that talked about Black people pulling themselves up by their bootstraps. More towards the end of his life, Booker T. Washington became, W.E.B. Du Bois, he became a Pan-Africanist. He became about Black power. He stopped becoming a assimilationalist, and that's why he was kicked out of the NAACP. And one of the reasons why he was kicked out of the NAACP is that at one point he wrote about the fact that one of the biggest problems with the NAACP that they did not have an economic plan for Black people. To this day, we hear about all these plans for the NAACP. We have to go out and vote. We have to stop this. We have to stop police brutality. We have to stop and frisk. We have to stop this. When do we ever hear about we have to figure out how to get entrepreneurship? You'll hear people say, we need jobs, we need jobs, we need jobs. But what do you hear people talk about? We need businesses, we need businesses, we need businesses. That's because that movement is not attached to an economic plan. And because it's not attached to an economic plan, it's not attached to anything sustainable. So any movement that comes out that is not attached to an economic plan, understand that that movement, excuse me, I need water again. That movement is not sustainable for Black people, and it does not address our principal problem. Your principal problem is not that you can't vote. Your principal problem is that you are inside of a system where you are the economically exploited person. If you stop being the economically exploited person, your problems will, for the most part, go away. So the fact that we're so focused on other things is what's always highly suspect. In Black Lives Matter, I never heard them articulate an economic plan for Black people. An economic plan, to me at least, is not let's ask for money from the government. Let's keep protesting for money. Hey, please give us this. Hey, please give us that. No, an economic plan is talking about how we're going to start businesses, how we're going to build institutions, and how we're going to circulate the dollar inside of the Black community. So the fact that they were not attached to an economic plan is a big lesson in why they were so limited in what they could actually achieve. So let's go to number 5, and this is my last reason why Black Lives Matter was a failure for the Black community and what we should learn from it. Black liberation is not through reforms, but it's through revolution. So this is a very important point. A lot of Black people want for things to be better. I think all Black people, in fact, want for things to be better for Black Americans. Not all Black people actually want for us to have complete equality. Complete equality. So what I mean by that is you'll hear a lot of Black people say, oh, we need more housing. That's a reform. We need more jobs. That's a reform. But when you kind of understand that the whole setup of the whole system is what is wrong and not just one thing in the system, then you're not just calling for a reform. You're actually calling for a revolution. You're calling for a drastic change in how everything is done from the top to the bottom. Malcolm X said something that I thought was so pivotal and so important. That is that if Black people truly got equality in the United States, it would literally turn this country on its head. Why is that? Because for over 400 years, we've been on the bottom in this country. When you understand capitalism, there always has to be a poor in order for capitalism to function. They don't tell you that. They make you think that, oh, we can get to this point where everyone could be equal, but that's actually not true in a capitalistic system. In a capitalistic system, there always has to be people who are poor. There always has to be people who are exploited, and then you'll have like the levels up from people who are okay and doing better. Then you have the really rich people who control everything. But if you had Black people no longer being on the bottom, then who's going to be on the bottom? That's the big question. So understand that we're not just asking for a reform. We're not asking for a law. We're not asking for something small. We're asking for a drastic, complete, radical change in how everything is doing, not just in the United States. Remember, Pan-Africanism means around the world. So also in Africa. I want to know, what do you think as far as how would the United States look if it was no longer exploiting African nations? How would the world look if they were no longer exploiting African nations? That's what we're talking about. We just don't want it to be better. We want it to be right. We want it to be just. And a group, a movement that is only calling for reform, that should be a green light, red light to you that something's actually off about their agenda, that their agenda isn't strong enough, that their agenda isn't going to do much. Black Lives Matter didn't achieve much as far as reform, but understand, all they needed was a law passed. And essentially, if that law was passed, then their agenda would have been done. So what would you have done after that law wasn't being implemented? Understand that you can even get the law passed, but if people aren't going to have it in their hearts to do what's right, that law is essentially meaningless. The organization was limited in that capacity. And ultimately, had they gotten more passed, might have done something, but it would not have corrected the overall issues that we have being inside of America as Black people. So that is my list. If you have not noticed, my throat is like about to give out from talking too much. So I'm going to end this video. But I'd love to hear what you would like to add to this list. So thanks.